All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And there we go, getting our tech stuff ready to go. So good. Well, thank you for our reader. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Krista and Bob and Lisa and Michelle. Really good readings. And I want to just make sure you guys can hear me okay. Give me a thumbs up if the sound is good. Okay, sweet. We're so excited to be every week. We're adding a little step of our hybrid service so that we can have in person to our, the legal capacities that we have, and also keeping the Zoom service. And the idea is to try to make it so both of these two things happen without taking away from either of the experiences. And so again, keep me posted if you would like to come and be part. The rules are that we will be wearing a face covering while inside, unless, of course, you're leading, and then you don't need to be wearing a face covering. And then we have the chairs set up to be 6 feet, 7 feet apart from each other. And it's a really beautiful thing. So I'd love to start to gather some more people. Hopefully we'll be doing a Torah service in the coming weeks, and just let me know. We're just working piece by piece and slowly together. So let me jump in here to our message for this morning. We have an awesome Parsha. And those of you who have children or have had small children in the past, you know that everyone seems to love to give new parents advice, don't they? When Chaim was first born, I remember the most common thing that people said was, even as they just walked by, they'd be like, cherish every moment because it will go by so quickly. That was the number one advice. Cherish every moment because it will go by so quickly. Soon they'll be driving, And I was like, oh yeah, I'm just learning how to change a diaper, Our solution to that problem was just have more babies, because then everyone, looks at our tribe, and instead of giving advice, they just say, gosh, you have your hands full. Full of blessings from the Lord, of course. But it's true, isn't it? It's true. I remember when Raina and I first found Ruach, Israel, as our home, and where are you? Little Benjamin Edelman was in diapers. Edelman family, I see you there. You remember that? And now he's learning how to drive. So time can sometimes seem to crawl and fly by at the same time. So how do you cherish every moment when you're either changing a diaper, or overwhelmed with a crying child, or when you're going through a rough season later on in life, when you're battling an illness, when you lose a loved one, when you feel like a promise or an expectation in your life has not been fulfilled? Now, some of the answers are nestled in our Parsha this week, Chayei Sarah. Now, the election newscasting may have overshadowed the significance of this event for many of us, but last week, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks passed away. Rabbi Sacks was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom from 1991 to 2013. It was a title that made him the head of a large network of modern Orthodox congregations. And yet, because of his unique ability to unite and inspire people, he became a key political representative for the Jewish community around the world. He became an important figure in Jewish-Christian relations. Prime Minister Tony Blair said in a statement that the rabbi had the rarest of gifts, expressing complex ideas in the simplest terms. He called him a man of huge intellectual stature, but with the warmest human spirit. Rabbi Sacks had written more than 25 books. His commentary on the Siddur is featured in the widely used Koran Siddur. And just this week, his translation of the Tanakh is being published. And we'll be reading some of his commentary in the upcoming course, Maturing in Messiah, that we're doing. Now, to give you a sense of Rabbi Sacks, when he was asked to imagine, this was in the beginning of his career, he was asked to imagine what he would take with him if he were stranded on a desert island. And he said that he would take a Talmud, the Jewish library of law and lore, and a pencil to write a commentary on it. As for music, he would take a devotional song from the Lubavitch tradition called Tzoma'ah Lacha Nafshi, which means, my soul thirsts for you, God. And quite simply, he said, I hope that someday something like that would be my epitaph, that his soul thirsted for God. So in October, Rabbi Sacks made public a diagnosis of cancer. It was a return of cancer for the third time. And on November 7th, he died at age 72, leaving his wife and 3 adult children and 9 grandchildren, young as we count today, and a man who certainly lived a full life. So in honor of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, I thought I would sort of feature him as one of my sources as we discuss the Parsha on living a full life. So I'll quote primarily from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks today because of this. Now, in Jewish tradition, the lives of the patriarchs Abraham and Sarah are role models for us. This week's Parsha holds a tension within it. Chayei Sarah literally means the life of Sarah, yet it begins with Sarah's death and her burial. And even more, it ends with the death of Abraham. So we wonder, why was this Parsha not called the death of Sarah and Abraham? Just last year, Rabbi Sacks wrote, often death and how we face it is a commentary on life and how we live it. The Parsha begins in Bereshit 23:1. Vaychu Chayei Sarah, and Sarah, Chayei Sarah, and the life of Sarah was, and then it's very specific, Me'ah Shana, 100 years, Ve'esrim Shana, and 20 years, Ve'shava Shanim, and 7 years. And then it concludes, Shnei Chayei Sarah, again, the life of the years of Sarah. So Genesis Rabbi, which is like rabbinic midrashic commentary on Genesis, wonders at the unusual breakdown of years. We have 100, 20, and 7. And it muses that perhaps Sarah was as innocent as a 7-year-old when she was 20 and had the beauty of a 20-year-old when she was 100. And then Genesis repeats again, Shnei Chayei Sarah, the years of the life of Sarah. Medieval Jewish commentator Rashi writes, the word years is repeated this time without a number to indicate that all of her years were equally good. Equally good? Didn't Sarah suffer years and years of disappointment? Didn't God's promise, that she would bear many children and then she was barren? After giving Hagar to Abraham, she was filled with envy. Twice because of a severe famine, she had no choice other than to be taken into a royal harem. Though dubious, there's a voice in our tradition that wonders if Sarah died out of shock because she learned that Abraham had gone to sacrifice Isaac, her only son, in her old age. Our Parsha continues in Bereshit 24:21. Avraham Zaken ba Bayamim. Abraham was now old and advanced in years. V'Hashem barech et Avraham b'kol. And the Lord blessed Abraham in all things. Abraham is actually the first person in the Bible to be called old. In Jewish tradition, the word old, zakan, in Hebrew is associated with wisdom. So the Midrash picks up on this and comments that though he had lived a long life, Abraham was the first to grow wiser and to grow, have more discernment as he grew older. And then continuing, the rabbis asked the question, why does the Torah add the phrase zaken ba'bayim, advanced in days? And the answer is suggested that Abraham was able to recount what he did every single day of his life. They say, while most people's lives can be measured in years, Abraham's life could be measured in days because he lived every day to the fullest. But again, like Sarah, Abraham certainly didn't have an easy life, did he? He had to leave everything he knew to go to an unknown land on faith. He went through circumcision as an adult. After being barren for decades, he had to take his own son to the altar, Continuing in the chapter, the Torah says, Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age. Old and satisfied, he was gathered to his people, the Torah says. So God promised Abraham 7 times that he would become a great nation and that he would inherit the land. But neither of these 2 promises have been fulfilled in his lifetime. The only thing he owned was a small field with a tomb where Sarah and he were buried, and he saw no Jewish grandchildren. How was he satisfied? What does our tradition say what does it mean when it says that Sarah's years were all equally good and that Abraham lived every day to the fullest? Well, I'll share two ideas this morning that are inspired by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. One, to have a why, and two, to begin a journey. First, to have a why. The beauty of Jewish midrash, the early second and third rabbinical lore that seeks to kind of fill in the gaps in the Torah, is that it draws deeper into the biblical text. It brings us in. For example, we don't know what Sarah might have felt in her darkest moments when she was brought into Pharaoh's harem, or in the moments of despair and doubt when decades after, the promise, she still had no children. But when the sages slow down and they spend time discussing Abraham and Sarah's remarkable serenity and resolve in the face of death, it draws out how they must have lived in the face of life. So Rabbi Sacks comments, Abraham knew that everything that happened to him, even the bad things, were part of the journey on which God had sent him and Sarah. And he had the faith to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fearing no evil, knowing that God was with him. Rabbi Sacks muses, he who has a why in life can bear almost any how. He who has a why in life can bear almost any how. He continues, having a why in your life means having a purpose to life, knowing that there is something you are uniquely destined to contribute and to achieve. Abraham and Sarah are supreme examples of what it is to have a why in life. The entire course of their lives came as a response to a call, a divine voice, Rabbi Sacks says. Then he told them to leave their home and family, set out for an unknown destination, and yet have the faith to believe that they would be taking the first steps to establishing a nation, a land, a faith, a way of life that would be a blessing to all humankind. And this helped them to live through the challenges as yet unfulfilled goals of their lives. Okay, well, we're not all Abraham and Sarah, but I think we need to have a strong why in our lives if we're going to stay true to God's calling over the inevitable twists and turns of life. And it's been my experience that, if you allow me to share personally my experience here, and forgive me if I've shared this with you before, prior to coming to know Yeshua, I was a driven person. I desperately wanted to play the trumpet in one of those big orchestras around the country. My freshman year of music conservatory, I averaged 8 to 10 hours in the practice room working on tone, one note over and over and over. Everything in my future seemed to rest on this goal. And I wonder sometimes at my motivations back then. And there were a few different motivations, ranging from more prideful motivations like acceptance and fame to more noble motivations, passion mixed with beauty that music brings to the world. But I didn't have a clear why. And after I encountered the Messiah, I encountered his love, I encountered his healing in my life, I was at a new crossroads. God changed something inside of me. It just didn't matter in the same way what I wanted to do or what I was passionate about. Instead, it had become more about what God wanted me to do. And Rain and I actually had just started to attend Ruach Israel, and we were engaged to be married, which was a huge change for me. I had begun to explore my own Jewish identity, which at the time had felt distant. And at the same time, I was actually working hard on a repertoire to send to an open audition with the Baltimore Symphony. And to be fair, I wouldn't have passed the preliminary round, but this would have marked the beginning of a multi-year audition season where you focus exclusively on taking as many auditions as you can, and you go wherever any leads take you. A very different life. But I'd also felt the Lord calling me into some kind of ministry in my life, and I felt that I had come to a crossroads in all of these areas. So I did what I do, which is I took a 3-day backpacking trip back on the Appalachian Trail to pray. And it was a difficult and a lonely backpacking trip for me, actually. It was snowy, early spring out in the mountains. It was cold. It was painfully quiet. It was gloomy weather. And I didn't feel like I really heard anything from God for the first 2 days. And then I was filtering water by a stream late in the night in the dark, and I was alone in the cold and the dark woods, just with my headlamp. And I was feeling lonely, I was feeling scared, and I was feeling small. And then in the stillness of the night woods, I felt him speak to me in a clear way. I want you to be a Messianic Jew. I want you to love Reina, and I want you to become a rabbi. And those three things have become the pillars of my life. And it hasn't always been easy, but even in the challenges, in the hard moments or lots of hard work, I've never looked back, and I won't look back, because I know that this is what the Lord is calling me to do. This is what he wants me to do. And that allows me to rest and to trust God more in the face of disappointments and hurdles along the way. Now, there will certainly be seasons in our lives where we may not know all of the details or be able to clearly articulate God's calling. But even here, having the why simply means that your heart is oriented towards God's ways and his desires. It means that you are ready, willing, and able to hear his leading when it comes. So knowing the why in your life dramatically changes how we view our circumstances. Rabbi Sachs has said, we cannot always choose what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond. In his commentary on Chayei Sarah, he shares the story of Edith Edgar, who survived Auschwitz and the March of the Dead. She was rescued at the end of the war, lifted from a heap of bodies in an Austrian forest with typhoid fever, pneumonia, and a broken back. A year later, she married another survivor and became a mother. Later in life, she said, I've learned not to look for happiness because that is external. You were born with love and you were born with joy. That's inside. It's always there. So if you know your purpose, you can find it nestled within any circumstance that you're in. Rather than lamenting hardship, we might wonder how God will transform and use it for his purposes. We might wonder how he is positioning us in these more trying times. COVID is a very good example for our family for this. This whole COVID season, as you know, has been very hard for everyone. And it wasn't this way for everyone, I know, but for our family, when things shut down and everything came to a crawling halt, our children flourished. And at first we fought it, but then we saw the Lord using it in our lives to lead us to invest more in each other and to cultivate a more intentional family culture. And then as things started to open up, the activity-driven have-tos of our society, they began to creep back in. You got to do this, and you got to do this, and you got to do this. And we came to another crossroads. Do we let this just be a season that goes by? Or do we adjust our course and even lifestyle in order to hold on to these priceless lessons? And perhaps you've seen similar blessings and have had to ask similar questions and make those hard choices. And I don't mean to be trite at all about the suffering COVID has brought to many families, but for us, we will choose to look back on this year as a bit of an awakening to what really matters most in our day-to-day lives. Abraham and Sarah seem to know that what makes a full life is not the external circumstances, but our internal perspective. And Rabbi Sacks writes, Abraham and Sarah had a sense of purpose, mission, being called, summoned, a starting of something that would be continued by those who came after them, of bringing something new into the world by the way they lived their lives. What matters was on the inside, not the outside, their faith, not their often troubled circumstances. I believe, Sachs says, that faith helps us to find the why that allows us to bear almost any how. And that brings us to our second point, to begin a journey. God promises, but we have to act to begin the journey that is larger than ourselves. God gave Abraham and Sarah two key promises, to have a ton of children and to own a great land. But again, the reality is they didn't see it. But it still came to pass, didn't it? Perhaps That's another message of our Parsha Chayei Sarah. Avraham does two essential things over the course of the Parsha. He acquires land in Canaan, which we read about in the first Aliyah today, and he arranges for the marriage of Isaac, which is in the second. After Sarah's death, Avraham owns no earth in the promised land, so he's forced to go to the Hittites, and he confesses to them, I'm a foreigner and a stranger among you. By their custom, he has no right to buy land. They don't want to sell it. They don't want to give it to him, so they politely give him a better option. No one among us will deny you this burial site to bury your dead. It's kind of a tricky way of saying, just bury her on someone else's graveyard and let it be. But Avraham insists, and eventually they allow him to pay what seems to be an excessive price for a field. Next, he sends his servants to go back to their homeland to find a wife for Isaac, so he would see his first Jewish grandchildren. And then he actually marries again, and he has 6 more children, something we often miss in the Parsha. The fulfillment of the promise continues. Jewish tradition offers wisdom in the Mishnaic text. Pirkei Avot says, it is not for you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. It is not for you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. We might also think of our Besorah passage today, where Yochanan's immersion and proclaiming the Messiah were important, Yet he was aware that he must decrease in order for the Messiah to increase. And he was killed by Herod before he could see his prophetic message come to pass. Rabbi Sacks comments on this passage. I'll read it. Bereshit 18:19, God says to Avraham, for I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Avraham what he promised him. Rabbi Sachs says on this passage, to be happy does not mean that you have everything you want or everything that you were promised. It means simply to have done what you are called to do, to have made a beginning, and then to have passed on the baton to the next generation. Perhaps the most important point is that large promises, a land, countless children, become real through small beginnings. Avraham left future generations something which to build. All great change is the work of more than one generation, and none of us will live to see the full fruits of our endeavors. Leaders, see the destination, begin the journey, and leave behind those who will continue it. Each of you, in your own unique ways, many ways, no doubt, play key roles in bringing about God's bigger promises. Even here at Ruach Israel, we hope to merit even the smallest beginnings of a greater Jewish awakening to the Messiah. And so, if we answer the call, God gives us the why. And then he asks us to work side by side, both with him and with each other, to travel our part of the journey, to make small things grow into great promises. That's the secret to the legacy of Avraham and Sarah and the fully lived life. Shabbat Shalom.